This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. I think one of the things that you'd maybe expect if you've spent sort of Nachocaster money on a guitar is that it would necessarily blow everything else out of the water, or it should be, otherwise you'd be kind of disappointed. Now, I happened to have come across the Danocaster just before this hit the shelves at Coda Music, and this Danocaster was not something I'd really seen for sale in the UK before. They're not that common here. And then a Nachocaster, these things seem to happen, you know, like buses, like they just show up and then you've got to try and find a way to see if you can afford one. So in any case, this ended up with like two sort of lifer type guitars arriving in more or less the same time, and I have to make a decision upon which actually is going to be the Tele that I'm going to hold on to. And it actually happens that I've already made this decision and there is a buyer lined up for it, but I just wanted to kind of reminisce and maybe do a video that hopefully might help other folks on their Blackguard journey if they're considering either a Nacho or a Danocaster. Now what I think you may or may not notice, so obviously we've got pickups in different positions and different types of pickups. The Danocaster, really nicely spec'd. This has some Ron Ellis pickups in it. What I'm basically finding is that these are two very distinct sounding guitars, which is not what you'd expect. Now unplugged, this difference is there too. So and a much more mellow sort of vibe to it. So that is actually a little bit different to any other Telecaster that I've played before. And that, I think, is basically part of what I'm making this decision based on. Is not necessarily that it's the best sounding Telecaster or the best playing Telecaster or the best looking Telecaster ever. It's more that it actually is substantially different to any other Telecaster that I've played, in that it's not just bright and twangy. It's like got quite a prominent mid-range, or conversely, you know, a little bit darker versus this one. Now that is absolutely, I'm imagining, for a lot of you guys, not at all what you'd be looking for. And I have to say, like, in the mix, when I listen to them together, the Danocaster maybe even has, because I dial my things in quite dark in general, so the Danocaster, I would say, has more resonance to it. And I would also say that if you're not a huge fan of relics, that the Danocaster is, I think, more subtle. And this pickguard and the screws are not standard. So you wouldn't normally have these screws at the neck pickup for adjusting outside of the scratch place. That's not how Dan does his stuff. But I would say it's a bit more of a subtle relic. It still looks like a pretty old guitar, but you don't get the over-the-top kind of sense that you do get with the Nacho, which, again, for some people is going to be quite a good reason that I think the Danocaster, when you compare it to a Nachocaster, is actually going to be quite good value. This one has, well, I think it does say something about, this is the soft V. This is a much more kind of bigger shoulders type guitar. But yeah, both great guitars, and as I say, I think the neck pickup of the Danocaster I prefer. The bridge pickup of the Nachocaster I prefer. If you're looking for a brighter guitar, then I would say both Nachocasters that I've played have tended to be this more dark sort of mid-rangey instrument. So if you're looking for a twanky, spanky Tele, then Danocaster might be the way, or something like a K-line. I might even marginally prefer some of what Danocaster is offering in terms of the headstock relic, and it looks more subtle, I guess is the word that I would use. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I do have a buyer lined up for the Danocaster. These are not that common to find in the UK, so I'm glad that I got a chance to try one. The Nachocaster has a bit more of the sort of hypey mystique stuff around it, but I wouldn't say necessarily stands tall above it in any regard. It's just that this is a slightly more unique
type of guitar, I think, where it's got that mellow sort of vibe to it, sort of like you'd expect on an old Tele maybe. I think this one is slightly lighter too. Anyway, so that sort of wraps that up. I could end up regretting this, I think, because I think there are definitely times when I'd be pulling a brighter, sort of spankier sounding Tele out rather than the more mellow, but I can't keep both. So let me know in the comments which you prefer, and I'm kind of hoping that there's a bunch of you that kind of agree with me that Dano definitely has a different voice, and you know, perfectly valid in terms of a Tele voice, and maybe even more of a stereotypical Tele sound than the Nachocaster. And in particular, I think this neck pickup really shines for me in terms of having a bit more clarity and just being a place that's really, really enjoyable to play.